I don't want to see you anymore." The words of my daughter were like an invisible knife stabbing straight into my heart. When everything is shattered, a small moment, a sincere word can change everything. This is not a story about easy forgiveness, but a difficult journey to find trust again, to begin anew from what seemed lost. This is not a story about a broken family. This is a story about deep wounds, heartbreaking moments, and a harsh truth. Sometimes the wounds are not the final things that define us. The house in the morning seemed no different from any other day, but today it felt somehow heavier, as though the air in the room was trying to stop, clogged with unspeakable anxieties. The faint rays of the sun peered through the curtains, casting light onto the worn wooden table, highlighting the old chips and the dust that hadn't been swept away for a long time. The objects in the house stood there, silent, unchanged, showing no sign of new life. The space was eerily still, as though time had stopped, or if it had moved at all, it was only creeping along like the slow drip of coffee from the brewing filter into the cup. The father stood silently by the kitchen counter, holding the coffee pot, his gaze sadly following the dark coffee drops falling evenly into the cup. He was in no rush. Every motion seemed to be an attempt to preserve the old habits, the moments that had never changed. But today, even those habits carried hesitation, as if he sensed something was missing, something important was slowly fading away. He had done this thousands of times before. Every morning, he brewed coffee, placed two cups on the table, one for himself and one for his daughter. Each of those mornings, though nothing special, had become a familiar moment, a part of their life. The coffee cup was not just a drink to start the day, but a symbol of the love between father and daughter. However, today, when the second cup was set down, an uneasy feeling, an unexpected hesitation appeared. He looked at the empty chair across from him. That seat, where his daughter would always sit every morning, was now silent, empty. There were no footsteps, no clear, bright laughter, no little questions she would ask when watching him brew coffee. There was only him, alone, silently sitting beside his own cup of coffee. His eyes could not leave the empty chair. A part of him wanted to leave the table, to do something to forget her absence, but another part kept him there, kept him in this space, in this scene. It was a part of the familiarity, something he could not shake off. He carefully placed the second cup on the table, making sure not a drop of coffee spilled out. A part of him knew that no matter what he did, the empty chair would always remain. Unable to be filled, he stood still, still holding the cup, his eyes still fixed on the empty chair. For a moment, it felt as though time had stopped, nothing moving around him. Everything in this house, from the walls to the chairs, seemed to have stopped as well, all staring at the empty chair. The silence was suffocating, with no sound except for the steady ticking of the clock on the wall. The coffee drops continued to fall, but the air around him seemed to thicken, heavy and filled with unease. At that moment, he couldn't remember how long he had been standing like that. A second, a minute, or an hour. Every moment passing in this house felt as if it was dragging on endlessly. He felt lonelier than ever before. On past mornings, perhaps, he never paid attention to the peace in those small routines. But today, when all that was left was just him, every small action seemed weighed down. He sighed softly and set the cup down on the table. His hand trembled lightly, not because the cup was hot, but because of an invisible feeling that seemed to envelop him. For all these years, he had been so used to brewing coffee every morning, so used to seeing his daughter sitting there, watching him, sharing small stories together. But now, the empty chair across from him was nothing but a silent mark, a gap that could not be filled. The kitchen door opened gently, a soft breeze flowing in, carrying the coolness of the morning. The wind swept through every corner of the house, brushing his skin like a vague reminder of the days that had passed, of the sweet moments that had slowly become the past. The father turned around, looking toward the window where the dawn's light was slowly spreading, but his eyes didn't really focus on it. Instead, his gaze seemed lost, searching for something he couldn't define. Day after day, he still woke up and did the same things as usual. Brewed coffee, set 2 cups on the table, then sat down, waiting. But each day he had to face an undeniable truth. His daughter no longer sat in the chair across from him, and he didn't know what to do to change that. She had long since left, not physically, but emotionally. The distance between him and her could no longer be bridged, no matter how hard he tried. This vast space, once their home, now only held faint memories. He couldn't help but feel that what was lost could never be regained. The words of love, the hugs, the peaceful mornings together. Now they were just fragmented pieces in his mind. He didn't know what to do to piece them back together. And every morning, as he sat alone at the table, the empty chair across from him reminded him that some things in life could never change. The last drops of coffee fell. He took a sip, then set the cup down on the table. The space remained as empty as ever, the chair still silent, unoccupied. And he knew that no matter how many more mornings passed like this, that chair would always remain a void. Just like him, still sitting there in the silent loneliness of a father, trying to hold on to what had been lost. In this house, everything remained quiet, but those empty spaces, they continued to exist silently, waiting for a miracle that perhaps would never come. The kitchen today seemed unchanged. Everything looked just like any other normal day, but if someone looked closely, they would notice the difference. The familiar smell of coffee still lingered in the air, but today that air felt a bit heavier, as if everything around was being pressed down by an invisible weight, unavoidable and suffocating. The morning light filtered through the window, casting only faint streaks of light on the old tiles, not strong enough to dispel the cold atmosphere that enveloped the kitchen. Every streak of light, every detail became pieces of the past, memories now unreachable. But in that moment, memories of a time long gone suddenly rushed back. It was the days when his daughter was little, the mornings when this kitchen was filled with laughter, the mornings when everything was simple yet complete. He clearly remembered that moment when she ran into the kitchen with bright eyes, messy hair, and a beaming smile. "Dad, I want to drink milk with you." Her voice echoed through the house, pure and innocent, like an invitation to the carefree days of childhood. He could never forget those moments. His daughter sat in the chair beside the table, her legs swinging in eager anticipation. He prepared the milk for her, his hands skillful and gentle, each step of the process part of a routine done without thinking, without needing anything more. There was only the closeness, only the love that shone through each small action, as if everything in this world was enough just the way it was. Back then, there was nothing to worry about, nothing to think about. It was just him and his daughter, sitting together in the warm kitchen, drinking milk, sharing little stories that only they understood. His wife stood by, watching them with a gentle smile. Her gaze was on her husband and daughter, but there was no weight to it, nothing that needed to be said. It was simply a sense of warm happiness. Everything was so simple, so ordinary, that no one could have predicted the great change that would come later. Those mornings would never return, but at that time, he didn't think about change. His daughter was his world, and these moments were things he never wanted to let go of. That feeling, the feeling of completeness, of a perfect family, was something he could never replace. His little daughter, with her innocent gestures and love, was all he needed in this life. But now, those memories seemed to have become a part of the past that he could never reach. His eyes opened, and as the weak morning light once again bathed the kitchen, the memories slowly faded. Reality surged back. There was no laughter, no innocent questions, no little girl sitting across from him. Only the empty chair remained, silent, unoccupied. The kitchen was still the same, but the air in this room no longer felt light. Everything seemed to be covered by a hazy mist of silence, of things unsaid and undone. He looked toward the clock on the wall, a place he hadn't paid attention to in a long time. For years, the clock had stopped ticking, but he hadn't noticed. Though he knew it had stopped, he still had no intention of changing the battery or fixing it. Perhaps he had simply overlooked it. Or perhaps he was too tired of everything to care about the old clock. One thing was certain: the stopped clock symbolized the relationship between him and his daughter. In the past, the clock had always ticked steadily, in sync with every moment of their life, with the small joys of simple mornings. But now, as the clock had stopped, all those moments had also come to a halt, like a part of time frozen. There was nothing more. Those happy moments, though etched deep in his memory, could never return. He reached up to look at the clock, but not to check the time. Instead, he sought to feel it, the clock that had stopped, the symbol of the broken relationship, those moments that would never come back. Although he couldn't deny that every morning when he woke up in this kitchen, he saw that clock, like a faded shadow of the past. He didn't know what to do to change things. That broken clock seemed like a small detail, yet it reflected exactly the halt of emotions, the stoppage in the relationship between him and his daughter. He gripped the edge of the table tightly, as if trying to hold on to something that had been lost. But as his gaze once again fell on the empty chair across from him, he realized that no matter how hard he tried, that chair would never be occupied. His daughter was no longer here. She had left, not physically, but emotionally. The relationship between him and her could never go back to what it once was. And that empty chair, no matter how long it waited, would forever remain vacant. Now, with the clock stopped, and memories of his little daughter slowly fading from his mind, he no longer knew what to do to change everything. All that was left were the broken pieces of the past, moments of happiness that could never be recreated. This kitchen, the empty chair, the broken clock, these were all symbols of what had been lost. He could not change the past, could not bring his daughter back, and that chair would forever be empty, never to be filled again. That feeling, the feeling of loss, of things stopped, was becoming clearer and clearer in his heart. The memories of the old mornings, of his daughter, of the days of happiness that seemed everlasting, were now nothing but wounds in his heart, wounds that would never heal. And no matter how many mornings passed, the empty chair and the broken clock would always be there, reminding him of what had been lost and could never be reclaimed. The kitchen was the same as any other day, but today the feeling of stillness in the air made everything seem heavier, suffocating. The early morning light coming through the window wasn't strong enough to dispel the heavy shadows that filled the room. This kitchen had once been the warm heart of the family, but now it was empty, drowned in an unbreakable silence. Every morning the father sat in the old chair, his tired eyes still waiting, a vague hope that everything would return to the way it was before. The door creaked softly as his daughter opened it and walked in. She wasn't in a hurry, didn't run or jump around like before, and there was no laughter filling the space. Her footsteps on the floor sounded like broken pieces, not light, but heavy and slow, as if marked by an oddly tranquil calm. She walked into the kitchen, her eyes never once glancing at her father sitting there, not stopping, not saying a word. Everything was reduced to basic motions, as though she was too familiar with this scene, but there was no connection between them. She entered with her phone in hand, her eyes fixed on the bright screen, completely ignoring the person sitting across from her. Her fingers swiped quickly over the phone, as if she lived in a different world, a world far from her father, a world where the small things he once thought she would cherish didn't matter. The father sat there, his heart sinking as he watched her. His gaze was heavy, his lips moving as though he wanted to say something, but then stopping, unable to speak. A sense of emptiness filled him, and the silence around him deepened. He clearly remembered the old days when his little daughter would run into the kitchen, her eyes lighting up when she saw him making coffee, and they would share those warm moments around the dining table. Back then, they didn't need to say much. Just a look was enough to feel the bond between them. But today, all that was left was a fading memory, slowly blurring with time. He couldn't stop looking at her, even though she didn't notice him. His vision blurred as if he wanted to reach out to her, to call back the memories of the past. But it was impossible. A part of him wanted to jump in, extend his hand to pull her back, but another part knew that she was already too far, too distant for him to reach. Invisible distances had surrounded them, thick and unbreakable. After a long silence, he spoke, his voice soft but filled with expectation, like a lone hope in the dark night. "Why don't you come home for dinner this weekend?" A simple, sincere invitation. He didn't expect much, just a quiet evening together, a family moment, no matter how small. He just wished for one simple thing, for his daughter to come home, to sit with him at the table like they used to, like when she was younger, and they would talk about the little things in life. But his daughter didn't look up. She answered softly, her voice cold and emotionless. "I'm busy." Those words were short, detached, and unchanged. It wasn't a soft rejection, nor an apology, just a way to end a conversation that held no meaning. Those words cut through any remaining hope in his heart. She continued to stare at her phone, not noticing his gaze, not stopping to look at the father sitting there, his hands gripping the edge of the table, trying to stay calm. He didn't say anything more. That answer was enough to make him understand that all his efforts had been in vain. A part of him wanted to remind her of the old days, when she used to hate fast food like this, when she would always ask for her mother's cooking, when she would sit at the table and couldn't stop chatting, laughing. But now, everything had changed. His daughter had changed, and he seemed unable to hold on to their relationship any longer. He glanced at the fast food box in her hands and whispered to himself, as a form of self-comfort, "You used to hate this." The words echoed in the stillness of the room, but they seemed meaningless. They were only a reminder of what had been lost, a part of the past that could never return. His daughter was no longer the innocent child easily captivated by simple pleasures. She had become someone else, a stranger, someone who no longer cared about him, who no longer paid attention to the things he once thought were important. He watched her eat quickly, chewing each bite without pausing, as if she was hastily finishing what she needed to do to return to her own world. Each time she reached for more food, he felt the distance grow. She didn't stop to ask him about his work, about the day before, about the feelings he was going through. She was completely absorbed in her phone, scrolling through endless messages, notifications. Then she stood up without a word. No glance, no exchange. She walked away, leaving the father sitting in silence, lost in chaotic thoughts he couldn't organize. She stepped out, leaving him alone in the kitchen, a place that used to be filled with voices, laughter, and closeness. But now, all that remained was emptiness, memories that could never return. He remained sitting, watching her figure disappear behind the door. The feeling of emptiness, sadness, and loneliness surged within him. With every passing second, the coldness in their relationship became more evident. He didn't know what to do, didn't know if anything could be changed anymore. Every hope seemed to have shattered, and their relationship now only remained as a pile of ruins, a part of a memory that could never be recreated. His daughter kept her head down, her bright eyes glowing under the light of the phone screen, the blue light from the screen reflecting on her face, highlighting the coldness she made no effort to hide. Each of her fingers swiftly swiped through notifications, as if living in a world completely separate from his. She didn't look up, didn't make eye contact with the father sitting across from her, and this only made the silence even heavier. These moments felt like a test of endurance for the father. Each unspoken question, every word he wanted to say but couldn't, were silent waves building up inside him. He looked at her, his eyes full of sadness but powerless to change anything. Her absence wasn't just physical. It was an emotional absence. It seemed she had built an invisible wall, and between them was an abyss too deep to cross. He couldn't speak, couldn't do anything but silently watch her eat, hurriedly, as if she didn't have time for the things around her. She didn't look at him, didn't stop, didn't ask how he was, didn't share anything with him. There was only silence and the growing distance between them. The quiet air, the muffling of feelings left unsaid, seemed to make everything heavier. The father could feel that no matter what he said, none of his words would make a difference. His daughter had changed. The relationship between them now wasn't just the absence of a loved one who had passed, but the absence of the connection he had tried to maintain but couldn't. While his daughter continued to eat, not sparing him a glance, the father turned his head, his tired eyes landing on the empty chair across from him. Every time he looked at that chair, he felt the emptiness, the incompleteness of this house. That chair had once been where his wife sat every morning, those peaceful moments he had once cherished. But now, the chair was left empty, a void filled with absence. Looking at that chair, he didn't just miss his wife, but also the mornings when everything was intact. She was no longer here, and his daughter was gradually growing distant, more and more each day. That empty chair was not just an inanimate object, it was a powerful symbol to him. It symbolized loss, the irreparable break. Looking at it, he remembered the mornings when the whole family would sit together when his wife was still here, and his daughter was the innocent child sitting across from him. Those moments, though simple, were warm, but now they had become memories that could never be regained. That empty chair was a testament to everything that had been lost. Not just one person, but a part of the love and family connection he could no longer preserve. A part of him silently blamed himself. He wondered if he had failed as a father, not giving enough time, enough attention to his daughter. He questioned whether his preoccupation with work, with life's worries, had made her feel neglected, unloved like before. But after everything, he could blame no one but himself. It was too late to fix these things. The invisible wall his daughter had built was now too thick, too solid, and he couldn't break it, no matter how many times he tried. The father closed his eyes for a moment, trying to remember the past, the times when he and his wife brewed coffee together, had breakfast, and talked about the little things in life. Those were the days when the family was still together. Despite the challenges, despite the hardships, at least they had each other. But now his wife was gone, and his daughter was no longer the child he could understand. The distance between them was immeasurable now, like an abyss that could never be crossed. That feeling lingered in his heart, relentless, impossible to forget. He felt as though he was standing outside his own life, like an observer, unable to re-enter his daughter's world, unable to reconnect with the loving memories he had always treasured. He couldn't understand her anymore. Her actions, her words now seemed to come from someone else, someone he no longer recognized. He turned to look at his daughter, but then quickly looked away, not daring to look too long. A part of him wanted to shout, wanted to do something to change the situation, to pull her back, to break the cold atmosphere between them. But he knew that all his efforts would only make her feel more uncomfortable, more distant. She no longer needed him, no longer needed his attention or his advice. She had her own life, and he was just a stranger in that world. What he once thought was important, the closeness of family, now seemed like something far out of reach. The empty chair remained silently there, unoccupied. Every time he looked at it, he felt more keenly the loss, the absence that he couldn't fill. There had been a time when that chair was full of love, full of conversation and laughter, but now everything had changed. This feeling, this emptiness that could never be filled, weighed heavily on his heart, like a wound that would never heal. He looked at her, then back at the empty chair, feeling the gap that couldn't be closed. And in his heart, the questions kept turning. Is there any way to start over? Is there any way to bring her back, to hold on to what has been lost? But he knew there were no answers to those questions. She had grown up, and he was no longer a part of her world. That feeling, the feeling that nothing could be changed, kept lingering, tormenting his heart. The kitchen was the same as every day, but today the air felt unusually heavy. The early morning light from the window still streamed in, softening the chill of the morning, but it wasn't enough to dispel the weight in the father's heart. The smell of coffee lingered in the air, but there was no warmth to it, no comfort that he had hoped for. His daughter was still sitting there, but there was no connection between them anymore, no conversations like before. She was silent, not speaking, not looking at him, as though he didn't exist in her world. Every movement she made, from opening the fast food box to bowing her head and looking at her phone, felt like a severing. He looked at her but couldn't say anything. What he saw was the shadow of a daughter he no longer recognized, not because of any changes in her appearance, but because the emotions were absent. His heart twisted, partly from pain, partly from helplessness. With every passing moment, he felt the gap between them widening, beyond his ability to close. The father looked at his daughter, but in his eyes was an emptiness, as if an invisible wall had been built between them. He was no longer the father she needed, not because he lacked love, but because she had stopped seeing him as someone necessary in her life. Every time she took a bite of fast food, her gaze remained fixed on the phone screen, without a trace of sharing, of concern, just a passing glance, as though these moments held no meaning at all. That feeling grew stronger in the father's chest, but he couldn't voice it, couldn't do anything to change it. He could only sit there, watching her in silence, his heart heavy as a stone. He remembered the days when she was little, those warm mornings when his wife was still here, when the family was intact, when they all sat together. Those moments had once been the greatest joy in his life. But now they had become memories that could never return. His gaze stopped on the empty chair across from him, the one where his wife had sat every morning. She would sit there, smiling at him as he brewed coffee, her eyes always sweet, full of care and love. But now that empty chair was only a void. He missed her not just as a wife, but as a crucial part of the relationship between him and his daughter. With her loss, the relationship between him and his daughter had slowly cracked. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't repair it. Suddenly, another memory flashed in his mind, a memory of a beautiful sunny day when he was teaching his daughter to ride a bike for the first time. She was so small then, still unable to keep her balance on the bike, but her bright eyes were full of trust. He clearly remembered the moment when he ran behind her, out of breath but happy, while she focused on her first few pedals, trying to keep the bike steady. That moment had been his true happiness. He could still feel the pride, the joy swelling in his heart as he saw his daughter, gradually mastering the balance, slowly riding on her own. He felt so proud, seeing his daughter growing up, overcoming the first challenges of life. But now, that memory had become a part of the past he could never reclaim. His daughter was no longer the little girl in those memories. Everything had changed, every emotion slowly fading with time. He no longer saw that innocent gaze, no longer felt the connection, the pride of seeing her overcome the obstacles. Now he only saw her, sitting silently, eating fast food, not looking at him, not noticing what he was feeling. When he reached out, as if instinctively wanting to touch her shoulder, to reconnect, to see if she could feel his love, her response was a slight brush-off, an unintentional withdrawal. She didn't turn to look at him, didn't say anything, simply pulling away slightly, as if she didn't want to engage, didn't want to get any closer. He couldn't help but feel the pain in his heart. It wasn't hatred, it wasn't anger. She didn't outright reject him, but that reflex to pull away spoke volumes. The distance had been too long, and now she had grown used to not having him there. She didn't hate him, but she no longer felt the need for him. The distance, though not outwardly obvious, was so deep that it made him question, what can I do to change this? He had no answers, only a sense of helplessness, an unspoken emptiness that couldn't be put into words. But when she turned back, gently picked up her phone and continued to scroll, the father sat there watching her, feeling the gap between them grow ever wider. It wasn't hatred, but a natural defense mechanism on her part after so many years of distance. The emptiness in his heart seemed to deepen with each passing moment. Every time she withdrew, every time she didn't look at him, it was another reminder of the loss of love, of the connection he had lost. He sat there in silence, watching his daughter, feeling the absence that could not be put into words. The sweet memories, the moments of love in the past, now seemed like a mist, slowly fading and dissolving into the air. But in his heart, she would always be the little girl riding a bike on a sunny road, her bright eyes full of hope, not the stranger sitting in front of him now. The daughter stood quietly by the bedroom window, her eyes focused on the garden, where her father was busily trimming the rose bushes. The morning light filtered through the trees, and the pale yellow rose petals swayed gently in the light breeze, creating warm streaks of light across the quiet garden. Although the scene outside was simple and beautiful, her heart was heavy with an unspoken sadness. In recent days, she had always felt like a stranger in her own home. Every step she took, every gesture from her father, no longer brought the closeness she once felt. Everything in the house seemed the same, but it felt completely different, as if the invisible wall between them was growing thicker, pushing everything further apart. She didn't want to face the truth, but she couldn't stop feeling it. Every time she looked at her father, every time she saw him pruning the branches outside, she felt a hesitation, a quiet sadness that she didn't know how to address. She wanted to be close to him, to feel the love he still had for her, but part of her was afraid that this love would only deepen the wounds. The door of the room gently closed, but there was no sound. She didn't step closer to him. She stood from a distance, partly because she didn't want to disturb him, but partly because she couldn't face the feelings she had long ignored. That feeling, the tug of war between love and pain, between closeness and distance, kept repeating itself in her heart. She didn't know what to do with herself, and even less, she didn't know how to face the father who no longer felt like the one she used to be close to. With quiet steps, she approached the wooden shelf where family memories were still kept. The old family photos had faded, and the old items still sat there, but time seemed to have dulled everything, stripping away the vibrancy of moments gone by. She looked at one of the old family photos, one she had seen countless times in her life. It was a moment when she was small, sitting between her parents, with joyful, loving smiles, no worries, no distance, just happiness and closeness. In the photo, her father's face was full of tenderness. His loving gaze made her heart ache because now that gaze was nothing more than a memory. She picked up the photo, her fingertips lightly touching her father's face, but she couldn't hold it for long. Her heart tightened as if an electric shock ran through her body. She didn't understand why she felt this way. Every time she looked at him, at the beautiful memories, she felt the emptiness, the pain she couldn't admit. It was the tug of war between love and distance that she couldn't explain. She quickly put the photo down, as if afraid it would make it hard to breathe, afraid that if she kept looking at what had passed, those emotions would completely overtake her, and she wouldn't be able to return. The memory of her father, of those moments when he held her in his arms, when he taught her the first lessons in life, those moments of peace and closeness now felt like a wound she couldn't touch. She had lost that connection, had gradually distanced herself from him, even though part of her always longed to return to those days. But she couldn't. She couldn't face the pain she had buried for so long. When she turned around, silently leaving the room, part of her still wanted to walk over to where her father was gardening, but she couldn't. She couldn't look at him without feeling the hurt in her heart, the tug of war between unnamed emotions and the coldness that had crept into their relationship. She stepped outside, but her heart remained heavy, unable to leave behind all that was weighing on her. In the garden, her father continued to trim the rose branches, his eyes calm, his hands carefully making each cut, as if these rose stems were the most important thing in his life. But deep down, he felt something, a missing piece that he couldn't put into words. He didn't see his daughter standing there, watching him from afar, but he could feel that everything was no longer the same. His daughter was no longer the little girl who used to come to him, looking at him like a hero. She had grown up, but at the same time, she had distanced herself from him, building an invisible wall he couldn't cross. With every snip of the shears, he imagined the memories of the past, the days when he stood beside his daughter, the days when the whole family was together. Those simple moments now existed only in memories, memories he couldn't touch. He wondered if he had missed the signs, been too absorbed in his work, only to find that now he couldn't do anything to bring her back closer. In those days, he hadn't realized the gradual changes in their relationship until now, when she had grown too distant. The garden grew quiet, only the sound of the shears snipping at the rose branches, the petals falling softly to the ground, like memories fading away. The father continued his work, not rushing, not worrying, but with each branch, each leaf, it felt like a part of the wounds he couldn't heal. He knew that no matter how hard he tried, no matter how much care he gave, the wounds in his heart couldn't heal on their own. The garden was quiet under the late afternoon sun, the wilted rose branches swaying gently in the light breeze like fading emotions within the father's heart. He stood silently, holding the pruning shears, but with every cut, it seemed not only to be an act of tending to the garden, but also a way for him to face the loneliness he couldn't admit. Each leaf falling to the ground, each rose branch being trimmed away, felt like a part of the past, of feelings he could no longer hold on to. The garden, though beautiful, made him feel an endless sadness. Everything around him was still, but inside him surged a sense of lack that he could not express. The sunlight streamed through the gaps in the leaves, casting soft streaks of light onto the ground. That light was gentle, like a soothing balm for his wounded soul, but not enough to dispel the tension within him. He stood there in his own garden, yet felt like a stranger. The memories of his family, of his daughter, of his wife, everything felt like an old book, its pages blown away by the wind, beyond his reach. All he could do was stand there, looking at the withered rose branches, trying to trim them, yet not knowing how to mend the emptiness in his heart. While he was engrossed in his work, the neighbor, as usual, came by the garden, carrying a bundle of fresh vegetables. The way the neighbor gently entered, bringing warmth, seemed to soften the tense atmosphere around him. The image of the neighbor, someone who had shared in the garden's growth, helping him plant trees, care for flowers, was a part of his daily life, a part he couldn't let go of, even though there was a void inside him that couldn't be filled. "Hello, I brought you some vegetables." The neighbor's voice came, soft but filled with care. Though not a close friend, this neighbor had been a part of his life for a long time. The small chats when they met, the bundles of vegetables, the flowers they cared for together. These were all things the father had grown accustomed to. But today, that familiar feeling only made him feel heavier than ever before. The father turned around, giving a forced smile, but the smile couldn't hide the exhaustion in his eyes. He took the bundle of vegetables from the neighbor's hands, but his hands trembled slightly. "Thank you," he said quietly, not meeting the neighbor's eyes. His smile was just an automatic response, an effort to maintain a normal facade, but the fatigue, the tension within him, could not be hidden. The neighbor stood there, his eyes fixed on him, as though he could see the difference in the father today. Something in him had changed, and the neighbor saw it clearly. "How's your daughter doing lately?" The neighbor asked, his tone not overly curious, but simply caring, a question that seemed ordinary, but made the father pause. He didn't want to speak of it, didn't want to admit what was happening in his family, but the neighbor had seen it more clearly than he had. The crack in the relationship between him and his daughter. The father hesitated, his eyes avoiding the question, unsure how to respond. A great void seemed to fill the question. He wanted to say something sincere, but couldn't. The only response he could manage at that moment was, "She's busy." The simple, short sentence wasn't enough to mask the pain in his heart. Every word he said felt like a knife wound in his chest, but he couldn't do anything but offer a forced smile. These words were just a facade, things he could share with others but couldn't face within himself, couldn't admit to the deep emotions buried inside. The neighbor nodded, then quietly said, "Well, that's good. She's grown up. She needs her own life, right?" The words didn't seem like an attempt to console, but instead reflected the truth that he couldn't avoid. His daughter, no matter how much he loved her, no longer sought him out like she used to, no longer shared those mornings, those simple conversations. She had become an adult, had her own life, and he, it seemed, was no longer a part of that world. After the neighbor left, the father turned back to the garden, but his gaze no longer held the meticulous care it once did. Each snip of the shears, each rose branch he cut, felt like a part of wounds that couldn't heal. The rose branches were gradually withering, and no matter how much care and pruning he put into them, it all felt like a futile resistance against time. The relationship between him and his daughter was the same. No matter what he did, no matter how hard he tried, the gap between them just kept growing, and there was no way to erase it. The crack between them wasn't caused by one single reason, but by the gaps that had slowly formed over time. Each time he didn't notice, each time he got lost in his work, each time he let the unspoken words sit, it was another deep cut into their relationship. Now, looking back, he couldn't deny that it was the silence, the times he didn't share, that had slowly driven his daughter away. What he saw in the garden, the pruned rose branches, was only left with silence. And he knew no matter how many branches he pruned, the emotions between him and his daughter couldn't be restored immediately. He still loved her, but that love was no longer strong enough to fill the gap that had formed. Every step she took, every decision she made him feel smaller, like a person standing outside the life of his own child. But at least he still stood there in his garden, even though he couldn't change anything. The rose garden would continue to live, even though the branches were no longer as fresh as before. All he could do now was hold on to the old memories, the memories of the little daughter he once loved, and hope that one day she would return, would see him, even just once more like before, when everything was still whole. The light in the kitchen was dim, illuminating the father's face, but it was not enough to dispel the darkness within him. Dinner had ended long ago, but he still sat there alone at the empty table. No sound, no communication. Only the cold silence remained. He couldn't shake off the feeling of emptiness, the loneliness that had long overshadowed his life. In that quiet space, the dining table seemed to symbolize the rift in the family. The empty chair across from him was merely the shadow of past shared meals. Those family dinners, when everyone gathered together, were now just a part of the past. His daughter no longer sat with him. Since his wife passed away, those evenings, though still filled with people, were now just memories. Now he was left alone. He knew his daughter had grown up, but it was that very growth that had pulled her further away from him than ever before. Sitting there, looking out the window where darkness was slowly enveloping the garden, the father felt something was wrong. A strange impulse made him glance at the table, where something unusual caught his eye. An envelope, simple, sitting silently on the table. He didn't remember when he had noticed it, but as his eyes passed over it, his heart suddenly began to race. A feeling of unease rose within him, as if something was calling him to confront a truth he wasn't ready to accept. The brown envelope, slightly crumpled, had no writing or markings, just creases on its surface. His hands trembled as he picked it up, as if facing something inevitable. He looked around, seemingly searching for a sign that would allow him to avoid opening it, but in the end, he couldn't resist. He tore open the envelope gently, his hands shaking as the papers inside began to reveal themselves. Taking a deep breath, he tried to steady himself, but his heart raced uncontrollably. What awaited him ahead? The first paper he pulled out was a notice from a company. His daughter had decided to quit her job. It wasn't for a usual reason. No company transfer, no vacation. No, it was a definite decision, one she hadn't shared with him. The notice was like a cold splash of water, sharp and clear, yet it left him feeling lost. His daughter, the one he had raised and guided, had chosen to leave her job without a word, without a conversation about the difficulties she was facing. His hands trembled as he continued reading. For personal reasons, I have decided to resign and will no longer be working at the company as of. Each word, each sentence was like a sharp knife stabbing into his heart. How could she not tell him? How could she not come to him when she was struggling, when she could have shared her challenges, her work, her difficulties? He felt like a stranger in his own daughter's life. He hadn't seen any signs, hadn't noticed she needed help. Now all he could do was stand by, helpless, not knowing how to help, not knowing how to understand her. Then he found another piece of paper, smaller, thinner, carefully folded, but it felt like a door opening to the pain he couldn't face. It was a loan agreement, a small loan, something his daughter had hidden from him for a long time, a debt she hadn't mentioned, hadn't shared, and now it appeared before him like an undeniable truth. A small loan, perhaps not significant in size, but it was a clear sign of desperation. Something she couldn't face, something she couldn't share with her father. This wasn't just a loan, it was a sign of weakness, of fear that she had kept hidden. She didn't want him to know, didn't want him to see that she had failed, had to borrow money to get through financial difficulties. A debt, though small, was a clear sign of a burden she couldn't carry on her own. How could he not have seen that his daughter had been struggling alone? Why couldn't she come to him? Why couldn't she share these problems with him? The pain surged within the father. He stared at the loan agreement, but his eyes could no longer focus clearly. Tears silently welled up, but he couldn't let them fall. Each paper in his hands felt like a deep wound, causing his heart to ache. The questions kept repeating in his mind, each one more painful than the last. Why did she hide this from him? Why didn't he know? What did he do wrong? These questions swirled in his mind, choking him, making it hard to breathe. The father looked at the papers in his hands, and an infinite sadness filled his heart. He couldn't understand why his daughter had to bear everything alone. He couldn't understand why she didn't trust him, didn't give him a chance to help. Every beat of his heart felt like it was breaking into pieces. He felt powerless, like a stranger in his own daughter's life. Every heartbeat, every breath was filled with regret for the things he had missed. He placed the papers on the table, his hands trembling. He couldn't explain it. That feeling, an unspeakable sadness, made him want to stand up, go to her, hold her in his arms, and tell her everything would be okay. But he didn't know where to start. The distance between him and his daughter couldn't be bridged by words alone, couldn't be healed by a hug. And he understood that, no matter how much he wanted to, he couldn't change anything. The father's heart ached, and he looked at the empty chair across from him. Like a symbol of absence, his daughter hadn't come home. And he knew that the distance between them wasn't just physical. It was the brokenness in their relationship. The papers, the debt, were just reflections of despair, of things that couldn't be said. He sat there in the silence. Every beat of his heart was steady, but it felt like a lament for the things he had lost. The night scene in the small house was all too familiar. The quiet kitchen, the light from the ceiling lamp casting a shadow that stretched across the wall. The father sat in the wooden chair, his head slightly bowed, eyes fixed on the dining table where only he remained. The empty chair across from him was no longer where his daughter sat. There was no laughter, no closeness during meals, just silence, quiet, utterly quiet. Looking at the empty chair, he felt his daughter's absence, but he couldn't say anything, couldn't do anything. Everything had changed so long ago. The house was no longer the warm home filled with laughter, but a place where he sat alone, in darkness and memories. His daughter hadn't come home for dinner. Recently, she only came back in the mornings, after he had finished preparing the meal, leaving him alone in the cold house. She was always in a hurry, never looking at him, never saying much, just eating quickly and leaving, as if it were just a formality. He didn't dare ask, didn't dare demand. He understood, partly because of her work, partly because he was no longer someone important in her life. In truth, he wasn't sure, but that feeling had clung to him like a constant aching pain. He reached out, touching the empty chair across from him. A feeling of numbness arose in his heart, as if something was preventing him from calling her back, from breaking the silence. The kitchen door creaked softly, and then he heard the faint sound of footsteps, hesitant from the hallway. It was her. His daughter had returned, but this time she didn't rush, didn't run by as usual. She stopped quietly, as if looking for something to say, a reason to explain, but not knowing where to start. The father slowly raised his head, his eyes dimmed, but he could still see her, standing in the doorway, her figure faint in the dim light. She didn't look at him right away, but lowered her head, her eyes as if searching for something on the floor. The space was silent, heavy, as though everything slowed down, like a still moment before everything collapsed. "Dad," her voice was weak, but it was a call not easy to make, as if she was trying to break through an invisible wall she didn't know how to tear down. But when she looked up, tears welled up in her eyes, no longer able to be held back. I I tried to prove I was good enough, but I failed." Her words echoed in the space, light as a breeze, but striking the father's heart like a great wave. Each word, each syllable reached deep into his soul, each one causing a sharp pain, but at the same time, making him understand that his daughter was seeking forgiveness, wanting to speak out everything she had hidden. She knelt before him, her eyes not looking at him, only gazing down at the floor. She didn't cry loudly, but tears quietly rolled down her face, wetting her cheeks. Those tears contained all the despair, the exhaustion, the brokenness that she had not been able to admit to him all this time. She no longer had the strength to keep up her facade, no longer had the strength to hide. She admitted her failure, acknowledged that she couldn't do it, admitted that she wasn't strong enough, not good enough, not capable of overcoming life's challenges on her own. And now, standing before him, she could only cry, only let her heart break, though she couldn't express it in words. The father looked at his daughter, his eyes softening, not with anger or reproach, but with compassion, with pain. He didn't know what to say right now, because some things cannot be expressed in words. He could only stand there, quietly watching her, with all the empathy and unconditional love. His hands gently reached up, softly touching her shoulder, a simple gesture but full of love. He didn't need to do anything else, just be here, right now, to let her know that he was always here, by her side. "I've failed many times too." His words were soft, simple, nothing complicated, but they were exactly what she needed to hear at that moment. It wasn't a hollow consolation, nor superficial advice. It was the truth, a sharing from the bottom of his heart. The father didn't say she wouldn't fail again, or that she needed to be stronger. He only said that he had failed too. And he understood the feeling of not being able to do what one hopes for, of being defeated by life itself. She lifted her head, her eyes still red, but there was something different now. She looked into her father's eyes, and for the first time in many years, she felt as if part of the burden in her heart had been lifted. Not because she had succeeded, not because she was no longer failing, but because she had been acknowledged. Her father didn't blame her, didn't get angry, didn't criticize. He just said that failure is a part of life, and it didn't define who she was. What mattered was knowing how to rise up, to keep trying. She softly sobbed, her tears still flowing, but there was a sense of relief in her heart. She no longer had to hold herself up, no longer had to hide her failure. She had done something significant. She had acknowledged her pain and weakness, and in that moment she felt the unconditional embrace of her father. The father still sat there beside his daughter, his hands resting on her shoulder. He didn't need to say anything more because his eyes said it all. In his eyes there was love, understanding, and the hope that no matter how many times she stumbled, he would always be by her side, helping her through it all. The atmosphere in the room had shifted, the tension slowly faded, replaced by a gentle warmth. Father and daughter sat there in silence, but the loneliness was gone. She no longer had to carry everything alone, no longer had to hide her failures. She knew her father would always be the first person she could turn to, never giving up, never walking away. When she lifted her head and looked into her father's eyes, she felt a peace, a comfort she had never found before. The tears were no longer a sign of weakness, but a release, a healing. She was not a failure. She was simply human, and failure was just a part of the journey of growing up. The whole house was immersed in silence, with the only sound being the steady ticking of the wall clock, a reminder that time never stops. The yellow light from the ceiling lamp illuminated the old dining table where father and daughter had once sat together, sharing meals and everyday stories. But now the table was empty, and only the father sat alone, staring into the quiet space filled with a sense of emptiness in his heart. The image of the empty chair across from him further highlighted the loneliness in the house. His daughter hadn't sat there in a long time. Every evening, he ate alone, wondering where she was, what she was doing. In recent days, she had always avoided him, never sat down to eat with him, never stayed for long conversations, just quickly eating and leaving as soon as the meal was over. He didn't ask, didn't interrogate, but the silence only made him feel the growing distance between them. There were things that couldn't be said, pains that he couldn't fully understand. Then, one night, when darkness had completely enveloped the house, his daughter returned. The sound of her footsteps came softly from the hallway, not hurried steps like usual, but slow, heavy ones, as if she was carrying an unspoken burden. The kitchen door creaked open, and she stood there, silent, not saying a word. She looked at him, but couldn't meet his eyes. Her gaze was full of hurt, but also full of longing, as if waiting for something from him that she hadn't found in a long time. The father lifted his head slowly, his eyes glancing at her, and he noticed the difference. This time, she wasn't rushing, wasn't avoiding him, but standing there in silence as if searching for an explanation, a confirmation from him. Though no words were spoken, the air in the room became heavy, like an undercurrent, full of deep emotions that couldn't be expressed in words. His daughter was no longer the child he could easily comfort. She had grown up, and the challenges she was facing now were too large for him to fully comprehend. After a long silence, she finally spoke, her voice choked, as if a storm was about to break. "Do you think I've disappointed you?" That question was like a sharp knife stabbing into the father's heart. In that moment, he felt his heart tighten, and the pain in his chest seemed impossible to put into words. He looked at his daughter, seeing the tears that hadn't fallen yet, but her eyes glistening with insecurity, fear, and worry. She wasn't seeking criticism, but that question carried a deep fear within her. She wasn't just afraid of disappointing him with her decisions, but also afraid that this failure would make him stop loving her. She wanted to prove to him that she was strong enough, capable enough, independent enough. But now, standing before him, she couldn't hide the weakness, the hurt she had carried for so long. Her efforts to conceal her failures, to hide her fears, now spilled out, visible in every word, in every glance. The father looked at her, sensing all the unspoken words, but he didn't rush to respond. He remained silent for a long time, as if searching for the right words to soothe his daughter's aching heart. He didn't want to offer empty words, didn't want to simply say, "Don't worry," or "Everything will be fine." He knew those words wouldn't ease the hurt she was carrying inside. Instead, he just wanted her to know that, no matter how many times she stumbled, no matter how many failures she faced, she was still his daughter, and he would always love her. Finally, the father sighed softly, not from exhaustion, but from a deep understanding within him. "No, I don't think you've disappointed me," he answered, his voice gentle but firm. His words weren't just a denial, they were an affirmation. He didn't see her as a failure, didn't feel disappointed in her. He looked at her, his eyes filled with love and empathy, as if to say that the challenges she faced didn't define who she was, and that a failure was just a small part of the long journey of life. "I'm just afraid that you won't give me the chance to be there for you." His words weren't just an acknowledgement of past mistakes, but also an affirmation that, no matter what, he would always be there, ready to support, love, and help her through everything. His daughter lifted her head, her eyes filled with tears, but this time, her gaze was no longer one of confusion and worry. There was a small change, a hint of relief in her eyes. She no longer had to fear that her father would be disappointed, no longer had to strain to prove herself. Her father's words, though brief, contained all the love he had for her. There was no judgment, no criticism, only understanding and unconditional love. She felt that, in her father's eyes, success was not the most important thing. It was her presence, the love he always had for her, no matter how many times she stumbled or failed. Her tears continued to fall, but this time they were tears of release. She no longer had to fight alone. She didn't have to prove anything to anyone, especially not to her loving father. She knew that no matter what, he would always be there, and he would always be the first to stand by her when she needed him, always accepting her, no matter who she was. In that moment, father and daughter sat in silence, but the loneliness was gone. The connection between them had returned, no words needed, only understanding, love, and trust in one another. A moment of peace where all worries, insecurities, and emotions that couldn't be expressed in words were soothed. She no longer felt like a failure, and the father no longer felt disappointment. They understood that in the love between father and daughter, no failure could ever tear them apart. The father's room was silent, the only sound the steady ticking of the wall clock, a constant reminder that time keeps moving forward. The yellow light from the small desk lamp shone on his face, highlighting the wrinkles, the marks of time etched deeply into his skin. He sat in the armchair near the window, looking outside where the night was slowly enveloping the space. His mind was in turmoil, trying to find a way, a right decision. A letter from the lawyer still lay still on the table, an unavoidable choice, but full of pain and contradictions. He looked at it, but his heart couldn't decide. Part of him said to settle things, to end this entanglement once and for all. But another part of him couldn't bear to make such a choice. How could he face his daughter? How could he end everything just for an easy, final conclusion? The father was not someone who could easily make decisions, especially in situations like this. His whole life had been full of challenges, difficulties, but he had never faced a choice that made him feel so powerless as this one. His daughter, the little girl he had raised from childhood, was now standing at a crossroads in life. The mistakes, the errors she had made, now seemed to have come to a point where she had to face them. But he didn't want to see her as a failure. He didn't want to end everything just because of those mistakes. Every time he thought about calling the lawyer, the image of his daughter, her eyes filled with tears, lost in fear, appeared vividly. He couldn't make her endure this pain any longer. Memories of his daughter flooded his mind like an unstoppable wave. He clearly remembered the days when she was little, running around the house, her laughter like the gentlest music, echoing throughout the house. He remembered the days when she sat on his lap, asking all sorts of innocent questions that he always had to think carefully to answer. Those days, he was her hero, the great father she trusted completely. He always thought he could protect her, always be the one she turned to when she needed a solid foundation. But now, as she struggled with failure, he felt like he was standing outside her life, unable to help her in the right way. The letter on the table felt like a deep cut into his heart. Everything was so clear, but it was impossible to accept. The lawyer proposed a solution, and it might be the fastest, simplest way to solve everything. It was a settlement, an agreement that would end it all. No more confusion, no more pain. But could that really be the right decision? Could he live with this choice, knowing that his own hands might close the only door that could help his daughter come back, give her a chance to start over? The father looked at the old teddy bear that his daughter had once loved. It still lay quietly on the wooden shelf. Though it was worn out, it still carried a childlike charm. Looking at it, he saw the image of his daughter as a child, someone who believed in everything, who believed in her father, believing he would always be the one to protect her, help her overcome any difficulty. His eyes closed for a moment. The sweet memories of when she was little rushed back. He saw her sitting on the bed, holding the teddy bear, telling him stories she had imagined. Those mornings when she woke up and found her father had prepared breakfast for her. Those moments were precious to him, irreplaceable, and now, looking at the old teddy bear, he realized he couldn't let her face the world alone again. "You once believed I was your hero. Maybe I should start again from that trust," he whispered softly, as if talking to himself, but also speaking to his daughter. His voice wasn't loud, just enough for him to hear, but in his heart it was a promise he had never really thought about, that he would start again from the trust she had placed in him when she was little. It wasn't about greatness. It wasn't about victories or success at work. It was simply his presence beside her, his persistence in loving and caring for her despite all failures. It was the promise that no matter how many times she fell, no matter how many challenges she faced, he would always be the one standing beside her, never leaving her. The father slowly stood up, his eyes shining with determination. Thoughts about the lawyer's contract, the decisive end, gradually faded away. He couldn't follow the simple path, couldn't solve everything quickly and cleanly like the lawyer suggested. His daughter, even though she had made mistakes, still deserved the chance to start over, and he would be the first one to give her that chance, because only he could begin again from that trust, from the love he had given her all these years. He walked over to the wooden shelf, carefully took the teddy bear in his hands, as if holding on to all the memories and feelings of her childhood. Every time he touched it, a warm feeling flooded his heart, as if he was embracing everything precious in his life, and he knew that no matter how difficult this decision was, no matter how much insecurity and fear he had to face, he would choose love, choose to believe in his daughter. "I won't leave you alone," he whispered, like a promise not just to his daughter, but also to himself. He would not abandon her, and if necessary, he would start again from the simplest things, from the trust she had once given him, from the sweet moments she had shared with him when she was little. Now he would return that trust to her once more, no matter how difficult the road ahead was, no matter how harsh the challenges would be. Finally, he placed the teddy bear back on the shelf and looked back into the room. Everything was still the same, but now his heart was clearer than ever. He would not let his daughter suffer alone, no matter how many times she fell, no matter how many failures she faced. He would always be there, ready to help her rise again and start over. The small room in the house still retained its simple charm, just like all the days before. However, today the atmosphere in the room felt different. It was no longer as peaceful and warm as usual. The dim yellow light from the desk lamp reflected off the walls that had begun to fade, making the room seem more muted. The father sat there at the old wooden table, with thoughts tearing at his heart. In front of him was an envelope that he had hidden away for a long time. Inside it, a settlement that the lawyer had sent. It was a clear, easy solution, a way to end everything without facing the complexities. A resolution that could make everything stop immediately, but his heart could not agree. The words on the contract seemed reasonable, but in his heart, they were like cold steel bars stabbing the heart of a father. Maybe solving it this way would be quick, simple, but he couldn't bring himself to shut down everything he had built with his daughter. The lawyer's words didn't touch his heart. They didn't talk about love, didn't mention the mistakes his daughter had gone through and needed a chance to correct. They just spoke of how to end things neatly without addressing the deep wounds in their hearts. He looked at the contract. Then, out the window, where the night had covered the garden, in that darkness, he saw the image of his daughter appear. He saw her sitting silently, not saying a word, just looking out the window, much like he was now, lost in thoughts without answers. She, though grown, though seemingly strong on the outside, in his heart, she was still the little girl who always needed her father's protection and love. Memories came rushing back, images from the past coming to life vividly. He remembered when she was a child, always coming to him with bright eyes full of trust. She always saw him as a hero, believing that nothing could harm her as long as her father was by her side. He had once been her world, the one she trusted completely. Those days were so simple, without doubts or worries, only love and a strong belief in her father. But time passed, and that girl had grown up, and in her growth, In the difficult decisions and mistakes, he felt himself becoming more and more disconnected from her life. She no longer sought him out for comfort, no longer believed in him as a hero. Instead, she became silent, hiding the worries and burdens she had to bear alone. He realized he hadn't noticed that change in her, hadn't helped her when she needed it. He had been too focused on the small things in life to realize that his daughter was silently breaking down. These thoughts spun endlessly in his head, unrelenting, unceasing. Then his eyes settled on the old teddy bear on the shelf. The toy she had loved for many years, though now worn and faded, still held priceless value to him. It was a symbol of the innocent days, of the pure love he and his daughter had shared when she was little. That teddy bear wasn't just a toy, but a part of his memories, a bridge between a warm past and a present full of challenges. Looking at the teddy bear, he felt a stirring in his heart. The memories, the emotions that had been buried for so long, rose up like an underground stream. He realized that he couldn't let a quick, easy end sweep everything away. The relationship between him and his daughter wasn't something that could be ended by a lawyer's call or a legal contract. He couldn't throw away all the love, all the hopes he had placed in her. His daughter still needed him. She still needed a chance to make things right, to rise up, and he was the first one who needed to give her that chance. You once believed I was your hero. Maybe I should start again from that trust, he whispered to himself, as if reminding himself, but also speaking to his daughter. His voice wasn't loud, just enough for him to hear, but in his heart, it was a promise he had never truly considered, that he would start again from the trust she had placed in him when she was little. It wasn't about greatness. It wasn't about victories or work success. It was simply his presence beside her, his persistence in loving and caring for her despite all the failures. It was the promise that no matter how many times she fell, no matter how many challenges she faced, he would always be the one standing beside her, never leaving her. The father stood up, no longer feeling indecisive. The decision was clear. He didn't need the lawyer, didn't need the finality. He needed a chance for his daughter, a chance for her to stand up from her mistakes. She had lost her way, but he would be the one to guide her. He would be the one to help her regain trust in herself, in the family, and in her father. He carefully picked up the teddy bear and placed it in his hands. A simple action, but it carried all the love he had for his daughter. This wasn't just an old toy, but a part of the sweet memories, a part of the love he would never forget. With the teddy bear in his hands, he looked back at the table where the lawyer's papers had been put away. Now he no longer felt the weight or conflict in his heart. He had chosen trust. He would give his daughter the chance, not just because she was his daughter, but because she deserved the chance to change, to rise from her failures. And he would be the first to stand by her, always believing in her, no matter how many mistakes she made. As he looked at the table where the papers no longer mattered, a hand gently reached out. It was his daughter, sitting across from him, her eyes no longer red but still full of worry, still seeking a word from him. Her hand trembled, but she didn't hesitate. She gently placed her hand in his. No words needed, no explanations, just this simple action. Their hands met in silence, like a connection, like a promise that didn't need to be spoken. And in that moment, the father knew he had done the right thing. Not because it was easy, but because he had chosen the path of love, the path of forgiveness and trust. They didn't need to say anything more, just be there for each other, silently finding each other in the darkness. The room was quiet, yet filled with a subtle change, as if something magical was spreading quietly throughout every corner. The father had made an important decision, and it wasn't just about the papers or agreements. It was about feelings, trust, and forgiveness. Over the past few days, he had felt the change little by little, not from the outside, but from within, from the small shifts in his relationship with his daughter. The small garden behind the house, once tended to carelessly, had become a place of new hope. Despite being neglected for a long time, nothing in nature is truly hopeless. The plants in the garden were still alive, albeit somewhat overgrown, but with just a little care and love, they could bloom again, just like his relationship with his daughter. Small signs of healing, though subtle, were filled with hope. That morning, the father woke up earlier than usual. Unlike before, when he sat silently in his room, weary and lost in thought, today he felt full of energy. The morning light streamed through the window, casting long streaks on the ground, and the fresh air made him feel invigorated, as if the weight on his heart had lightened. He looked outside, where the garden was slowly coming back to life, and decided that today he would go to the garden and tend to it all. Not just the plants, but also the relationship between him and his daughter. His daughter had not woken up yet, but he knew she would join him in the garden. Though unspoken, they had agreed that if possible, the garden would be the place where they could begin again. Taking care of the garden wasn't just a mundane task, it was a way for them to reconnect, to start over from the small things. These tasks wouldn't be monumental, but they held deep meaning. His daughter was no longer the innocent child she once was, but in this work, he still saw a part of her that he had always known. When she stepped out into the garden, the sunlight had already risen, and the space seemed to be bathed in a warm glow. His daughter still looked a little shy, but unlike before, she didn't shy away. She didn't retreat to a corner of the garden, nor try to hide her worries. Today, she stood there, looking at the garden as if she wanted to see something change, not just the garden, but herself as well. "Do you want to help me, sweetie?" the father asked, his voice gentle but full of patience and waiting. These words weren't a demand, but an invitation, a chance for her to realize that no matter the difficulty, he was always here by her side. She nodded, her eyes still not fully bright, but at least she no longer turned away. "I'll help you take care of these rose bushes," she replied, pointing to the thick rose bushes that had become overgrown, blocking out the light. "Maybe I can trim them so they'll be healthy again." The father smiled, and they both stepped into the garden to begin working. At first, his daughter didn't know where to start. She stood silently, holding the pruning shears, staring at the rose branches, unsure of what to do. But the father didn't rush. He simply observed, not only working, but also allowing her to find her own way. That was what he had always taught her. Sometimes, the important thing wasn't to find an immediate solution, but to face the difficulties and work through them step by step. As she pruned the branches, she was unexpectedly pricked by a thorn. The sharp pain made her flinch, but then she couldn't help but laugh. She turned to look at her father, a little embarrassed. "I got pricked by a thorn again," she said, her voice light, as though acknowledging her clumsiness. The father looked at her, his eyes sparkling with tenderness. "When you were little, you never liked wearing gloves," he said, his voice soft but full of warmth, as if sharing a happy memory from the past. "Every time that happened, I had to run to find some antiseptic and worry you'd get hurt." She listened, then turned to look at him, her eyes sparkling with a bit of surprise and emotion. She smiled and replied, "I remember those days. I never knew you cared for me so much." The father smiled gently, his eyes softening as though it wasn't just a story from the past, but a reminder of the love he had always shown her. "I've always remembered everything. Even though there were times I couldn't be with you, the memories of you have always lived inside me." She looked at him, a warm feeling rising in her chest. These weren't just words of advice or teachings, but a recognition that everything she had gone through, every tear and every hardship, had not been overlooked. She didn't have to carry everything on her own. She didn't have to be afraid of failure because her father would always be by her side. A few minutes later, they continued working in the garden, taking care of the plants together. They didn't say much more, but the change in the air was palpable. She no longer felt like she was carrying an overwhelming burden. Instead, she felt accepted, loved, and most importantly, trusted. They didn't need many words, only smiles, exchanged glances, and the presence of each other in this space. As the work in the garden neared completion, they stood back and looked at their efforts. The plants had been carefully tended to, the branches neatly trimmed, and the garden now looked brighter and more alive. This wasn't just the result of their labor, but a symbol of the changes in their hearts. A garden that had been neglected had come back to life, just like the relationship between them that had been forgotten and was now revived. She turned to look at him, her eyes shining, and couldn't stop smiling. Her laughter rang out, not loudly, but the sound of relief and the simple joy that had been missing for so long. I'm really happy to be here doing this with you. It makes me feel like I've come back to how things used to be. The father looked at her, smiling, not needing to say anything more. Her words were enough for him to know that they had overcome a part of the difficulty in their relationship, and in that moment all the wounds seemed to begin healing. The doors had opened, and they were both stepping into a new journey, full of hope. The morning light gently filtered through the tree branches like a warm wave spreading across the garden. The entire space around was filled with stillness, yet full of life. The garden, which had once withered, full of tangled bushes and dry, withered branches, was now gradually coming back to life. The grass was growing green again, the branches were trimmed, and a light breeze blew through, making the leaves dance in the sunlight. This scene was not only a change in nature, but a vivid image of recovery and a new hope sprouting from things that once seemed forgotten. The father sat on the old wooden chair, a place he had sat countless times before. But today, the chair wasn't just a piece of furniture. It was where he could feel the change in his relationship with his daughter. He looked at the garden, where the plants had been cared for and revived. The atmosphere around, though quiet, made him feel a peace he hadn't felt in a long time. Everything was moving, albeit slowly, but this movement brought him a sense of calm, as if all the worries and tensions from the past days had gradually faded away. His daughter sat beside him, her eyes focused ahead, diligently working. She didn't say anything, but in the way she concentrated, in every gentle movement as she trimmed the plants, the father noticed a change in her. She was no longer the tired and withdrawn girl she had been, no longer the one who avoided everything to escape the pain. She had begun to learn how to face reality, how to accept her mistakes and rise from her falls. She didn't need to do everything perfectly, but she had started to understand that it was in these simple and humble acts that healing could begin. As the sunlight fell, he realized that his daughter had grown a lot. She no longer needed his guidance as before. She had learned that things couldn't change immediately, but with patience, care, and time, everything could gradually get better. Just like this garden, though once neglected and withered, it could thrive again with care. His daughter was the same. She might have stumbled, made mistakes, but now she was learning how to stand up, how to find herself again, like a sprout emerging from the soil. Taking care of the garden was not a heavy or hurried task. Their actions were gentle, much like the steps in life, slow and unhurried. They didn't speak much, but a comfortable silence enveloped them. It wasn't the silence of distance, but the silence of understanding, of harmony between the two. Each time they trimmed a branch, each time they dug the soil, they didn't need to say unnecessary things. Everything had been shared through their eyes, gestures, and the mere presence of each other in that moment. When his daughter was unexpectedly pricked by a rose thorn, she flinched and quickly pulled her hand back. A little pain, but not a serious wound. She looked at the cut, then at her father, and a soft laugh escaped her. Got pricked by a thorn? Again, she said, a little embarrassed, but also full of joy. The father looked at her, and a gentle smile appeared on his face. It wasn't mockery or teasing, but a kind humor filled with love, as if he was realizing a part of his little daughter that he had once raised. Back then, my daughter never wanted to wear gloves, he said, his voice gentle but with a hint of light-heartedness. Every time, I had to rush to find antiseptic for you, worried that you might get hurt. She couldn't help but laugh when she heard that. You still remember those times? Back then, you were always so worried about me. She looked at her father, her eyes filled with emotion. She realized that all the things he had done for her, Even the little things like that were acts of unconditional love. These things, which she hadn't realized before, had now become precious memories that she could never forget. "I've always remembered," he replied, his eyes warm. "Even when I couldn't be with you, the memories of you have always lived in me. No matter how much you've grown, no matter how many mistakes you've made, I will always remember those moments." His words didn't need further explanation. They were the words of a father, simple yet profound. They weren't empty promises, but an acknowledgement of the love shared over the years. She looked at him, and in her eyes was a sense of relief, a newfound understanding that she had never felt before. Her mistakes didn't define her. Love and forgiveness did. And now, sitting beside her father, she realized something she hadn't realized before. She didn't need to worry anymore. She didn't need to face everything alone. She could rely on her father, knowing he would never give up on her. The two continued working in the garden, unhurried, undisturbed. They didn't need to do everything quickly. They simply enjoyed each moment in this peaceful space. The father continued trimming the branches, while his daughter diligently cleaned up the dry leaves. Though they spoke little, they understood that this was not just about caring for the garden, but also about nurturing their relationship. There was no need for words. Each action, each shared moment, was a small step in the process of healing. As they neared the end of their work in the garden, they paused and looked at the fruits of their labor. The garden was no longer a desolate place. It had slowly returned to life, with the plants carefully tended to and fresh sprouts emerging from the soil. This was not just a sign of rebirth in the garden, but also a sign of change in their relationship. They had found each other again, starting from simple things, but those were the solid steps they needed to rebuild their bond. Looking at the garden, his daughter no longer felt lost. She knew that, even though there were still many challenges ahead, she didn't have to face them alone. Her father was there, and they would move forward. Together, in the peaceful atmosphere of the garden, they didn't need to say anything. The sprouts that had grown, the trees stretching back to life, were like their relationship. There was no need for an ending, no need to say anything more. Love and trust, though not perfect, could still be a new source of life for them. As the flowers faded, a sprout had emerged. Just like new things, new opportunities always come, as long as we have the patience and faith to nurture them. The father and daughter sat together without words, only their presence. And in that moment, they knew that, even without a clear answer about the future, at least they had begun again. And that was all they needed. The story of the father and daughter is not a battle to reclaim what has been lost, but a long journey to rediscover the forgotten parts of themselves. Revenge here is not about retaliation, but about overcoming the pain, the silence, and the old wounds. They do not need to hurt each other, nor do they need to use hateful words to prove their strength. What they need is forgiveness, trust in each other, and healing through the small, everyday actions that make up their lives. And so, with each passing day, they draw closer to a new future, not one built on vengeance or hatred, but on love, patience, and acceptance. This story, much like the flowers in the garden, may not have fully bloomed yet, but at least they have begun to tend to the young sprouts of life. We can all find ourselves in this story. Aren't we living in relationships that aren't always easy or perfect? We may get tangled in mistakes and wounds, but do we have the patience to let the seeds of love grow, to let new opportunities blossom? Leave your thoughts in the comments. You'll find that sometimes the greatest strength doesn't come from revenge, but from the ability to forgive and accept. This is the message this story wants to convey. A story that doesn't end with revenge, but with healing. And what about you? What will you do when faced with the wounds in your own relationships?